The next agenda item is motions received, where we have had one. At this point, I would like to remind Council that there is a 60-word limit on motions that are submitted to ensure business can be carried out in a timely manner. This is set out within the Constitution and will from now on be imposed as a limit to ensure fairness. Tonight's motion is on screen and has been submitted by Councillor Knowles. Councillor Knowles, would you like to introduce it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Greenfield House in Mainhead was a children's home for boys operating from the early 60s to the early 70s and managed by Berkshire County Council. Set up to give boys a new direction with choir practice at St Mary's Church and regular sporting and swimming trips, seeming to be a very positive impact on the young boys there. Sadly, though, the reality was completely different. Between 1964 and 1970, Don Prescott ran the place with brutal discipline and sexually abused the young boys entrusted to his care. In addition, it's alleged that he rented out the boys to paedophiles as far afield as the Midlands and East Anglia. Victims actually lost count of how many people abused them over time. Victims described, for example, going to church to sing in the choir and seeing abusers in the congregation. Don Prescott left in some haste in 1970, and the home closed a few years afterwards. Don Prescott died a few years ago, so he's not here to answer for himself. Berkshire County Council ceased to exist in 1998, and all the facilities like this fell into the geographical responsibility of the successor councils. Rbwm never ran this facility. These then are the facts, but I would also like to draw attention to the damage to those victims' lives caused by this abuse, and all made worse by the seeming inaction of the authorities tasked with keeping them safe. It took until 2000 for a survivor to come forward and initiate police action. There have been none up to that point. It appears, though, that social services were aware of some of this, and there must be something that triggered Prescott's removal. That's what is unresolved. Who knew what and when? And why was there not police action taken at the time? I know that child protection was different in the 1960s and 70s, but this is a pattern of serious assaults, which I find it hard to believe that no action, investigation, or questions appear to have taken place. As Rbwm scopes opening a children's home in the borough, I think it's a timely thing to address these matters. As I said, Rbwm don't hold extensive archives about the events surrounding the management of the homes. We never ran them. We don't hold those records. A lot of the alleged attackers, being much older than their victims, and this being a long time ago, have passed away. So access to justice becomes very difficult. But it's the people above that and how it all came together is what really is the crux here. Not the people carrying out the act, but how were they able to do it? In most cases, all that remains are the victims, and we owe it to them to help them find the answers they seek. So I ask you all to support this motion unequivocally. We can't hold such an inquiry ourselves, but we can support and lobby for one. We can write as a council to government. We can ask our members of parliament to ask questions of the House and to campaign with us for a public inquiry. Sadly, none of this can bring the childhood back for these boys, and I don't think it will bring closure, but it might provide answers to questions in the minds of each of them. I commend this motion to the council.
Thank you for that, Councillor Knowles. Is this seconded?
Yeah. Right.
And you're reserving your right. Thank you. The first speaker I have is Councillor Carol Da Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are some very important reasons why I and you should support this motion. The first being transparency. We should not be hiding actions and protecting perpetrators from the past, albeit long before any of us were involved in this council and before the Rbwm was even in existence. That said, the Rbwm should take responsibility and act now, as it has taken over from the council as its predecessor. It may be questionable if we currently have a legal obligation to the boys from this residential establishment, but morally we do. You may have seen recent news stories where a well-known department store that was under a previous ownership has taken proactive stance against the now deceased perpetrator and is supporting his victims. And this kind of responsibility is one that all organisations should follow. Every child affected by abuse whilst in the care of local authority and has had their voice suppressed has been further injured by the perpetrator and the authority in charge of its care, including the inherited authorities. I'd like to emphasise that this is not isolated to this establishment, and reports are prolific throughout the country and includes numerous councils, some of whom have acted in a supportive manner towards their victims. I speak as a care experience survivor who was placed into residential care as a place of safety from my abusers. This children's home did not meet that description and was not a place of safety, with physical, emotional and sexual abuse being a daily occurrence. As such, I understand the harm these boys have lived through and the need for them to have their experience acknowledged. I ask you, colleagues and members, regardless of political persuasion, that you support this motion so that the voice of those who have been rendered voiceless after reporting their experience and not being supported can now be heard, and the scared child that lives within them can have a chance to heal. Can we please ensure that this is the beginning of a process of openness and supporting the many now adult survivors of abuse whilst in care of local authority can have their trauma acknowledged and find their voice and their healing? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Amy Tizzy next.
Thank you. And I just want to start by thanking Carol de Costa because I'm sure that some of this debate may be very triggering for you and for other people who've experienced sexual and other types of abuse. So thank you for being so open and honest. And I apologise if any of the remarks made in the room do cause those feelings of distress. It really feels at the moment that barely a day goes by without some appalling behaviour of this type of a sexual predator being revealed in the press. We're getting it from all sides. We're watching in horror as abuses mainly against women and children are revealed. You know, and some of these people are really high profile. They're people we thought we could trust, like newsreaders and rappers, American rappers, and as you mentioned, the influential owner of a store. But what do these examples actually have in common? And also the terrifying French case at the moment, what do they have in common? These acts have been perpetuated over many, many years. And in some cases, it's taken decades for victims to feel confident enough to reveal them, all the things that happened to them. And these things have been kept hidden for so many reasons. But now, a lot of those cases the doors are being thrown open. The light is starting to flood into those corners that have been kept hidden. And we're all learning about these dreadful things that have happened. And that's what must happen in this case as well. Now, in July this year, Rbwm agreed to recognise people who are care experienced as having a protected characteristic. And that meant that we felt that we have a duty to people who've experienced care, not just when they're in our care or in the short period when they're technically care leavers and just left our care, but for the rest of their life. And I said at the time that caring is a doing word, it's a verb, it's something we have to do. And in this case, we have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to do what we said we would do and stand up for care experienced young people, however long ago their care was, and we have to show them that we still care. And I think by supporting this motion, that is the first step in showing that commitment. And I encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rbwm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make a couple of brief remarks. First of all, to say I fully support this motion, and to thank Councillor Knowles for bringing it forward this evening. I wanted to point to the fact that I'm sure many members are aware, governments have held public inquiries in the past, and in fact held a wide-ranging public inquiry from called the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, which published its final report in 2022. Greenfield was not one of the kind of case studies that they looked at when it came to residential care homes, but I know they focused on places like Lambeth and North Wales, and you know the findings and investigations in those cases were harrowing. But just because that inquiry has concluded, it certainly doesn't draw a line under the issue, and I fully support going in and having a new public inquiry and lobbying for that for Greenfield, and to learn so that we can find the specific truths of the circumstances that occurred in that residential setting. Ultimately, it may happen. Whilst these things happen many decades ago, it's not. It should never be considered historic abuse. It's non-current abuse, because ultimately the victims of abuse, live through the trauma every day for the rest of their lives, and we mustn't lose sight of that. As a slight side issue, that going back to that inquiry, I think what's very important when you hold an inquiry, it's not just one of the points is to get recommendations, and I think an inquiry needs to be independent and to set its own terms of reference. Ultimately, when it makes those recommendations, it's important then that government takes those on board. I know government were preparing to incorporate certain elements of the recommendations from that 2020 from the independent inquiry into legislation. Unfortunately, because Parliament dissolved certain provisions such as mandatory reporting, which is something I think you alluded to in why were social care not reporting what they were seeing. That's still not a statutory. There's still not a statutory duty on the statute to do that. I think it's vital that when those recommendations come out, that they're followed through. So, I will certainly speak to a member of Parliament and can talk to him after this meeting, and hopefully write a letter to the Home Office and make sure that the new government is going to be taking those recommendations forward. I think that's really important, and certainly we need to learn the new lessons from a new inquiry, specifically on Greenfield, and find recommendations from that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grove.
Thank you. So I saw it mentioned on social media, and I thought it would be remiss not to address the point that the person raised regarding the length of time that's passed since these abhorrent crimes were committed. And the fact is, yes, a number of decades have passed since these abuses took place, but time does not magically resolve the pain and suffering endured by the victims. And time does not erase the fact that justice has not been served either. And I appreciate many will escape justice because they are no longer living, but until a full judicial review is carried out, we just don't know. And regardless of whether individuals are alive to face the deserved consequences of committing such horrific crimes, I believe 2 points persist. Firstly, victims deserve to be heard, regarded, and to know that they matter, and that their suffering has been acknowledged and they are believed. Secondly, alive or dead, perpetrators of these crimes do not deserve to have their reputations protected when their victims live with the consequences of what they did. That would be a further insult to those who have survived the abuse, and something we should not tolerate. I know as a council, we do not have a legal or statutory obligation to do anything related to a site that was never our responsibility, but I believe we do have a moral obligation to help. especially when a reasonable plan for doing so is presented. So for me, this cuts to the very heart of who we are and what we stand for. And I personally can't think of any reason why anyone would choose not to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt?
Yes, thank you. I haven't prepared anything written down. So what I'm saying really is heartfelt, and I think everyone here in this council feels the same. This goes back many, many years, and for those poor young children to be in a situation where they've got no recourse, there's no one to go to cry out to, and they've lived with that, even after they've left and they're still working, but they've lived with that all these years. I would like to thank Councillor Knowles for bringing this motion forward, and I certainly agree with everything Councillor Carol da Costa has said. This is very, very emotive, and this, hopefully, there will be a public inquiry, will be long overdue to the terrible legacy these poor children and men now carry. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no more speakers, so Councillor Werner. Beg your pardon, Councillor Wisdom da Costa.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Knowles, thank you very much for bringing this forward, and Councillor Werner for seconding this. It's important that the truth comes out. It's important that we hold perpetrators to account, whilst we still can. Unlike the victims of Jimmy Savile, Mohammed El Fayed, and many others, we've got the chance to bring some justice here, and at least to shed light. An inquiry would shed light on some of the things that have happened. It would call very widely for evidence from many institutions, including the Church of England, who I understand have evidence, including the police, our own former social services. So, we must push forward with this. We should not keep apologising for not holding people to account whilst they were alive. Now, I know that I understand, I should say, that one of the individuals may have passed on. Others, this is the perpetrators, may have gone to ground. But we're talking about well over 40 children who were in our care or in the care of the former council. And we assume those responsibilities as corporate parents. 40 children who were abused, who were raped under our care. We can't let the truth be hidden. We must unturn the truth. We must be open and honest, transparent in our actual investigation, so that there is an opportunity for people to come together, I won't say in a non-judgmental way, but certainly to share evidence openly, so that these children who are now young men whose lives have been blighted. Can you imagine that? If it was your child, they were raped when they were children, and then the rest of their life, they can do very little because they're so traumatized by what happened to them that life becomes unimaginably horrible. No chance of being a doctor or a counsellor or an officer. Well, sorry, you're right. Little chance. But for most, I'll be honest with you, Carol has been an exception. If you look at some of the other people in the same school as her, they are basket cases, adorable, but lives who are dependent upon money, upon the funding of government, rather than being able to contribute really, really positively with the fantastic gifts that they have and they had. So, people may talk about the cost of a public inquiry, but do you know what? If the government agree that this is a matter of great public concern, they should be petitioned to set aside funds, and our MPs, our new MPs, Jack Rankin and Josh Reynolds, should be asked to push for questions in Parliament. So I agree that we really must push forward with this. We mustn't just call for a public inquiry, we must see it through. Unfortunately, some of our resolutions in the past have not been seen through. So this one we must see through. So I would call on everybody really to vote for this, and to make sure that as a council, officers, Mr. Evans, and Elaine and any other officers who take over after you, that we push this to the end, to the extreme, so that people like John Affleck, and I've been given his permission to mention his name, can finally rest in peace, move on with their lives after 40 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Werner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to thank Councillor Knowles for bringing this motion and for all the councillors that have spoken. It's a really emotive issue, so thank you for everything you said. It really cuts to the heart of how a council-run institution can go so wrong. You know, as a borough, we're looking at setting up a children's home. And thinking about what children's home would be like. It would be sort of like the home I provide to my daughter. It would be safe and you would be protected. And instead, this home was the opposite of that. You know, Rbwm Motion said there was a broad public inquiry into child sexual abuse, including in children's homes, but Greenfields was not one of those case studies that was investigated as part of the inquiry. So the facts of these terrible events have not had this kind of focus, and the voices of the abused have not been able to tell their story. This home was ultimately run by Berkshire County Council. So although not a Royal Borough of Windsor Maidenhead, we are still the successor authority to Berkshire. So I really do feel strongly it's our responsibility to not let this lie, but to pursue a public inquiry into what happened. Just because time has passed, this happened in the 60s and 70s, that should be no excuse to kind of brush this under the carpet. It needs to be brought out into the open. So please do support this motion, and I get the feeling everybody is, and bring this, quite frankly, it's a stain on Maidenhead. Bring it into the open, learn the lessons, and try and give some small relief to those survivors who suffered so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knowles, would you sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the contributions. It is emotional, and I do appreciate exactly where you're coming from. I will say that there are ongoing inquiries into localised abuse. Kent recently reported, so there is precedent for this. For the procedure, the Cabinet Office instigates them and they're funded centrally, so there's no drain on our resources. And to be quite frank, there's very little we actually hold in information about this, because this, you know, the whole authority preceding it wound up in 1998 and the homes closed in the mid-70s. So there is very little information around anyway in the National Archives. I know because I've found most of it, but there's other stuff out there which we don't have access to and the local authority don't. So if we could run an inquiry and an investigation, I think that would be the way we would take it, but we can't because it was not under our responsibility, jurisdiction or management. It's also, I love the phrase from Councillor Tisdale, shining a light on these things. And that's what it's all about. And I see it as a two-tiered thing. At the one degree, you have the criminality and the depravity of the abuser themselves. However, they were given access. They committed an act of criminality. But there's a deeper thing here, which is the betrayal of trust. The trust of the parents who put their children there, the trust of the boys in their home, in the authorities and the management and the authority at that time to keep them safe. And that's what really, really, I think, digs into most people, that complete betrayal of trust. And also, when you're a small child, a small boy, you look up to grown-ups and authority figures, and you think they're going to look after you. And I can't imagine what it would be like to go through your life never being able to have that reassurance or that comfort blanket. That's what is the most tragic thing about it. Today, I've had a couple of victims reach out to me on the strength of the BBC news story on their website. And I'm sure if we can bring forward more victims who perhaps don't want to go through the experience of a criminal case, perhaps their offenders have long passed away, but they may feel able to contribute. And that can be a cathartic experience to open up in that way. So I'm so glad that it seems that we have full support here. And I'm just hoping it will move us down. It will be a long road, but I've already been reassured that our members of Parliament fully support this and will be working with us to raise the profile of it in Parliament and with the Cabinet Office. And that's really reassuring to me. So thank you very much for your support. But I would also like you to spare a moment and a thought and thank those victims who've been campaigning and plugging away at this since they were 11 and 10 years of age. And they're the ones who deserve our thanks for persevering with us. And I hope this moves us down the road to getting some sort of answers in the end about what exactly went on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The motion is just coming up on the screen. Can this be agreed unanimously? Thank you.